So thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to see so many of you. We're absolutely delighted to have a double act of fabulous women for a Women in Criminal Law event this evening. Kate and Anne are from Sherwood Consulting, and I know that they've very kindly and helpfully prepared handouts for the session today, which I will distribute to everyone who's attended. And it has all of their details should you wish to get in contact with them directly and seek further advice and guidance after the session. But we're absolutely delighted to have them. We're sure that they'll tell you more about their work as we go through the various roles and application process that they'll give you tips on. But with no further ado, I hand over to Kate and Anne to get us started.
Thank you very much, Chloe, and it is a delight to be here. Anne and I are very excited to have been invited to this, and thank you very much. It's quite a dry subject, so we're going to try and spread things between the two of us, and we're going to just use a PowerPoint in a moment just to give us a structure. So we'll try not to make it a lecture and try and break it up into sections so that we can take questions from people, so that we can add a bit more life. And if anybody is prepared to share any experiences at the end, then that would be really great when we start to get to the tips section, so that we can see if there's any experiences that other people have had that they would be delighted to share with everybody. So, what are we going to talk about today? The outline structure for the session then is just to set the scene for you all around competency-based processes, so that you can start to understand what that is. We'll look then specifically at how the judicial process is evolving and changing, because it is changing and making some changes at the moment. We'll look at the online application. We'll have a quick review of the competencies so that we can start to see what they are measuring. Quick chat around independent assessors, look at the range of shortlisting and sifts that are now being brought in, and then look to the selection day itself. And then we'll finish with some tips and see how people, the sorts of things that you can do in terms of planning for a judicial application, so that you have all your ducks in a row before you start. So what is a competency-based process then? So what they're looking for are specific examples, so actual examples of things that you have done that you can use as a story to put into your form, so that it's evidence-based. It's not just a generic assertion, this is how I would always do it, this is what I have done. It's really getting down to, how do you do things? What is it that you give that makes a difference? So not just what happened in a case, how you approached it and how you made a difference. The theory behind that is that your sort of past behaviour is what's going to predict future performance. And it's that reason that they want some current stories of how you've dealt with work, and it can be outside work as well. But it's getting to that very personal, very uncomfortable place. How do I? So those personal pronouns. So what I did was, it was up to me. And the sad thing for you is that it's less about the law and more about you and getting into that uncomfortable space. So a competency-based process, give us some specific examples of how you've done something, so that you can show us how you deal with something in a challenging and difficult situation. I'm going to hand over to Anne now, just so that she can give you a little run through some of the process. So over to you, Anne.
Great, thanks, Kate. So the statistics, just to manage your expectations, are not in the favour of the applicant, because the success rate is relatively low for judicial appointment. And I think we're all expecting that the numbers applying are only going to increase after the experience we've all had in the last 6 months. I think we can expect there'll be a flurry of interest going forward in the next 12 months. So don't be put off by that, but also I think manage your own expectations that it may well not be the first attempt. You may be great and successful first time round, but a lot of people aren't. So we're talking at about 12 to 15% success rates. And what's different about applying for judicial appointment is that compared to, say, a silk process, which some of you may have been through or be considering going through, With a silk process, again, it's a competency-based process, but as long as you demonstrate the standard required, you get the badge. It's not like that with a judicial competition. You need to demonstrate the standard required and beat the competition. So if there are 50 posts for recorder available, you need to be in the 1 to 50 and not 51 or below. And 51 might still be a good applicant, 52, etc. So it's about standing out. It's about demonstrating competencies using the most difficult, complex, standout examples that you've got and making the most of whatever is different about you, whatever you've got that's a little bit exceptional that you can show in one or other of the competencies, and bringing in examples from your wider career, bringing in examples from outside of your actual client work and maybe something that you've done within chambers. So standing out is what it's all about. So as we have there, it's not for the faint-hearted, and I think managing your own expectations at the outset is really important, and be in it for the long haul, because it may well take 1 or 2 attempts to get there. Are you ready? Well, helpfully the JAC have a test section on their website which absolutely puts that question to you. Are you ready? And it prompts you to answer some questionnaires, and it looks at whether you're ready in terms of eligibility. Have you been practicing for long enough? Have you got the right sort of passport? Are you in the right sort of age bracket? So it asks you some basic questions about eligibility. It also has a questionnaire about good character. So if there's anything that you're concerned about, you can put your answers through that. And then of course it has a question about suitability. So have you got the right sort of competencies and the right sort of experience? That "Are you ready?" on the website is answered anonymously. So regardless of what it tells you, you can still go ahead and apply, and nobody knows that you're that person that got those answers. That's fine. But just to manage, again, your own expectations and your planning process, just thinking about where you are and how far you may be from doing that, I think that can be a good place to start. If you're already in a part-time appointment or a fee-paid role and thinking about, am I ready for a full-time appointment, I don't think that's the right place to go. So you wouldn't be looking at the JAC website to decide if you're ready. For that sort of question, it's more like speaking to the people that you're working with, speaking to your sponsor or judges that you work with and getting their feedback and thinking about whether you might be ready for a full-time appointment yet. If you're not yet ready, it's thinking about, well, have I got the breadth I might need to demonstrate these competencies? And if not, what are my gaps? If I've got gaps in specific areas, what might I need to do to plug those gaps? So I've worked in the last 12 months with a lady who's perhaps unusual in seeking judicial appointment, in that she's currently a solicitor in a Magic Circle law firm. So she's not coming from a barrister background. And she was unsuccessful first time around in applying for her judicial appointment, and the feedback seemed to be that was she a little bit detached from the real world in her ivory tower and doing the sort of work that she did. So she really set her stall out to go and put some charitable work on her CV, and she's worked with a women's charity and she's worked in a food bank. So if you're thinking yourself, have I got the range of examples I need, there may be things that you want to do before applying to really build up that breadth on your application. When they launch a competition, they are really super mean in that it's only open for 2 or 3 weeks. So you really don't need to wait until it launches to start drafting. And if that comes in at a time when you are flat out busy in the middle of a trial, you've kind of missed your opportunity for the year. But there is a lot that you can do in advance. You can keep an eye out by signing up for alerts on the JAC website, so you get alerts as to when the date of launch is coming up. And you can actually start today, tonight, or tomorrow, this weekend, and pull your examples together. There's almost everything that you can do to be prepared before the competitions actually launch. And that would certainly be our advice, I think, Kate, to get yourself as well prepared with as much completed as possible before you start to put anything into the system.
Absolutely.
Another point just to flag, it's no longer a setup where you would be appointed to the area in which you live. And conscious that we're talking to women tonight, I don't think this is necessarily the most helpful opener that they could have given. So the idea is that all of you could be appointed anywhere in the country. Hooray, how wonderful, you know, it's opened up the whole country. Well, actually, if you've got childcare or carer responsibilities, as well as your very busy practice, that can be really difficult to juggle. And what they say is that by all means list your preferences on your form and say any areas that you would not be prepared to go to. And I think if you speak Welsh, you can apply in Wales as well. And if you don't, it's probably a disadvantage to applying for Wales. But you could be sent all over the country. If you come out top of the class for class 2020 and you're the first placed person, you will get your first choice of area, of circuit. If you are the 50th person in a 50 recorder competition, let's say, you will not necessarily be given your choice. So again, I have a friend who has primary carer responsibilities. His wife's a partner in a law firm. He does most of the childcare, and he got an appointment in Manchester. They live in London, and that almost prevented him taking up the appointment, but he did proceed with it. And I think you need to be aware of that before applying, that you may well be asked to sit in somewhere that is out of town for a week at a time. And although you can schedule the weeks that you're willing to offer, you will need to be willing to be away from home perhaps for a week if it's not going to be close enough for you to travel on a daily basis. So do think hard about the locations that you're willing to offer. Kate, if there's anything you'd like to add?
Not at this stage, that's fine. Thank you, Anne.
One of the things I should just say in terms of being prepared is that Kate and Anne have unbelievably prepared this very helpful vacancy calendar document that I will also distribute afterwards, which might help you just start putting those dates in your diary or the thought in your mind of time periods to be ready for.
I'll pop that up on the screen at the end, Chloe, then everybody can have a look at it as well when we're taking questions. So Anne, are you?
Sure. So the application form consists of two parts. The generic part, which is all your details. They recently have cut this right back. If anybody's applied previously, you might have seen that there were boxes that had no word limits that we could squeeze a bit of extra information into about your career to date and other things about you. They seem to have cut that right back, so it's really name, rank and serial number, and tick a box to say whether you do law stuff, or you might lecture a bit, or you might sit. So it's very, very basic and limited now as to what they require. That can be completed in advance before a competition launches, but it's very difficult to be able to add anything more than basic information on there. Where you are going to stand out though is when you put together your self-assessment, and that's specific to each competition. So the self-assessment will be competency based, and Kate is going to talk more about which particular competencies, but they tell you in advance. And the idea, I like to think of this as sort of a risk management exercise. The JAC are letting you know what you're going to need to be good at to succeed in this job. And this is about managing the risk. You tell me about examples in which you have done this really well already, so that we know you're going to be able to cope when you're given the job. So the self-assessment is about demonstrating those competencies for the role and showing that you're more than capable of doing it. So the competencies are the same for all judicial appointments. There's an extra one for the more senior roles, which covers leadership, which Kate, I'm sure, will mention. But it's the self-assessment section where you will bring together your examples and tell the story about you. What's unique about you? What is your way of working with others? What is your way of managing your time? And quite often we have people saying, well, I just do what everybody does. Tell us what you just do, because you will be minimizing it, and your way of doing it will be rigorous. It will be leaving no stone unturned. It will be never letting anyone down and keeping all the plates spinning, and telling us a story that shows that you just do that every single day, and that's not an issue for you. That's what they need to be sure of. Just confident that you will be able to meet that competency. Occasionally there'll be additional questions. So for more senior roles, they may want to see a piece of written work. Kate was telling me earlier that a Court of Appeal applicant recently submitted a speech. And so they may want to have more detailed beyond the competencies for more senior roles. I think High Court has gone for a statement of suitability recently, which is more like a letter of application, which gives you a bit more free rein. But generally speaking, for the initial appointments, if that's what most people here might be interested in, it will be examples according to each of those 5 competencies. You'll then need to fill in details about your availability, of course, and then give some information about independent assessors. And you'll perhaps need to think in advance about who you might want to ask to be your assessors, and I'll speak a bit more about that in a minute.
Thank you, Anne. So let's start to look at the core competencies then. So the core competencies that start from your deputy district judge, your tribunal judge roles, and right up to recorder and circuit, they use these 5 core competencies. So that's exercising judgment, possessing and building knowledge, assimilating and clarifying information, working and communicating with others, and managing work efficiently. So 5 primary areas. You get 250 words per competency to fill in on the form. So that is going to need you to be very succinct, very clear. You can use bullet points, you can use abbreviations, but try not to do it so that it goes so far that it becomes incomprehensible, especially to somebody who's a lay person who's going to be reading the form in the JAC. So look at those competencies. And exercising judgment. What's exercising judgment around? Well, that's around integrity, where you've had to display independence of mind, where you have really had to apply the law to make fair and legally sound decisions. And it may be sometimes, especially if it's your first judicial post, that you're going to need sort of proxies for judicial examples. So some quasi-judicial types of examples. So if, for example, you're on the Chamber's Management Committee and you're dealing with a complaint from a client against a barrister in Chambers, then that might be the opportunity for you to see 2 sides of a story and be able to come up with a result in the middle. So think of other quasi-judicial types of opportunity where you might be looking at 2 sides of a story to come up with an answer at the end, rather than this is my side of the case and this is how I'm going to fight it. So just try and think of those proxies. Again, you might be able to use those as examples from within Chambers. You may be doing something ex parte, for example, and therefore you're having to be fair to both sides. So just think of some of the challenging and difficult decisions that you have had to make and how you've gone about doing that. So they will want to hear how you've gone that. And if the decision involves some complex facts, complex law that you're really having to get to grips with, or it's in a very sensitive or highly charged atmosphere, again, that is going to add to the level of challenge that will layer up the decision making that you're making. So possessing and building knowledge then is the next section. So that's about not only your detailed knowledge of the law in your particular area, but also an ability to demonstrate a willingness to learn and develop professionally. And if you're going to be moving into an area that you don't practice wholly, or so say you were applying for a family DJ job or something like that, and you're primarily a criminal practitioner, then you would need to show that you are picking up unfamiliar areas of law on a regular basis so that they can see that you're going to be quick at picking things up and being able to apply them. So think of how you might be able to show real depth of knowledge in a particular area, particularly if it's an evolving area or if there's a recent authority that has just changed an aspect of the law or an area of the law that you're involved with. How will you do that? It's quite a hard section to do, the possessing and building knowledge, and it's very easy to just get into the, well, I do lots of seminars for solicitors about updating them on this law, and I'm always keeping an eye on new authorities that are coming in. But do you know what? Every barrister does that, actually. And what you need to do is find something that is different, that is unusual, that will enable you to stand out from the crowd, building on what Anne said. So make sure that you're showing something slightly unusual, a bit more innovative, and if the more complex it is and the more difficult it is, the better that example will be. Assimilating and clarifying information then, so that is getting to the nub of something really quickly, getting a clear understanding of something, and probably doing something like identifying the gaps. Where are the gaps in this information that I've been given? Where are the ways in that I'm going to probe to make sure that I win this case, or that XYZ happens? So think about a time when in very short shrift you've had an enormous amount of data to just plow through, and you've put it into a spreadsheet so that you can try and get some sort of a chronology, or you worked with a junior, or you've worked with a leader and you've got a specific area, but you're doing a conjoined document maybe up in the cloud or something like that. So think of really assimilating a lot of information, especially if it's technical information, for example, that you're again having to master and get on top of. And the more that information is conflicting information, which is making you have to determine specific things around it, the more challenging that example will be in terms of assimilating and clarifying information. That time when you arrive at court and your opponent gives you a 40-page document that's a medical expert report or something that you've never seen before, and you've suddenly got to get on top of it and then be in front of the judge in 20 minutes time, having appeased your client. So think of those sorts of challenging and difficult situations where that happens. Working and communicating with others. Again, think of everybody that might be involved in the courtroom if you're trying to think up examples. So not just the judge and your opponent, but it could be everyone else in the courtroom. It could be the client, it could be the Mackenzie friend, it could be a whole host of other people. But think of very difficult, challenging circumstances in terms of communication. And the more that you can show that you flex your communication so that you adapt it to somebody else's style, or you don't react to somebody's style, so that you diffuse a situation and really calm things down. Think about how you might be able to use examples like that. This working and communicating section also is looking at diversity, and so seeing how you might deal with unusual circumstances and be able to adapt to that situation and come up with a fair and appropriate result at the end of it. But the controlling and diffusing tension is usually a great one, where you've had to come in and calm everything down. Maybe you've got a leader who's getting on the nerves of the leader on the other side, and you're the one that's coming in and calming it all down and getting the clarity and getting the thing back on the straight and narrow. Managing work efficiently. So that's working and planning effectively. Again, it's quite a hard one not to lapse into generic discussion where you just go, well, I manage my childcare and my busy practice and my charity work. I juggle all of that and I get it all done and it's absolutely fine. What they want is some specific examples. So very often, if you've got a surprise or something that happens in the middle of a case that throws everything that you'd anticipated, and you're having to revisit how you do something, something else is prioritized over something else. How do you manage that? Do you do one thing by a video link to get that over and done with and save on the travel time, and then you've got a junior or something working on some of the legal research for you, and then that moves forward. So try and think of some specific examples that show you explicitly having to deal differently than you had anticipated. Your lovely plan that you did at the beginning of the day has just gone straight out the window, and that weekend away has disappeared into the ether. So think about a time when you're under pressure and think about the way that you might have had to adapt for that. So those core competencies stay the same for up to the High Court, but they will have varying definitions underneath them. But if you try and just do the bullet points underneath each of these competencies, so they've got sub-bullet points under each of the competencies, if you try to think of an example for each of those bullet points, you start to dumb down the stories. So think of the big pictures that encapsulate the whole competency, not just Here's one that says, do I manage my time efficiently? Yes, well, that's going to be not necessarily a big story, but something else where you're juggling a whole load of stuff might be. So each competition will have slightly different versions, but those core competencies remain the same. So you can be starting to capture those in a blue book or something like that, capture some of the examples so that you've got them to hand when you do need them, and you've got a 2-week window from launch to deadline for a competition.
Kate, I don't know if now is a good time just to butt in. There's a question here in the chat whilst you're talking about competencies. Somebody, Jilly Cooper, in fact, who is actually here this evening, she's asked, is there any point in using examples from non-professional life when answering competency questions?
Absolutely, and I think that non-professional life gives you that you're in touch with the real world as well as your busy world where you're perhaps working in something of a bubble. And again, things like chambers examples, trustees, school governors, things like that, they can bring some really great examples. And if you're a school governor or something, it may be that there's an issue in the school, and that might be the quasi-judicial type of example that you can start to bring forward that will demonstrate some of those skills. So absolutely try and use some of your wider roles, and that's part of planning as well. What are the useful things that I could be involved in that interest me and that really motivate and drive me, that I will also be able to use as solid examples to show a bit more depth and breadth. So absolutely.
I suspect that over the last 6 months, when everybody's lives have been turned completely upside down, there'll be examples that we can draw upon about, all having to deal with the unexpected, having to deal with things that are not going to follow the usual order, and facing new challenges, different use of technology. All of those things that you will no doubt have been grappling with over the last 6 months, I'm sure will be rich examples to draw upon.
And just to illustrate the difference, so for Deputy High Court and High Court roles and above, they reduce the competencies down to just 3 core competencies. So those are legal and judicial skills, personal qualities, and working effectively. For the very senior roles, leadership will replace working effectively. So actual High Court will probably have their leadership, and certainly that's when you're going up to Court of Appeal, it's leadership there. But for Deputy High Court, it's working effectively. And usually that's a 1,500 word or 4-page statement of suitability. And as Anne said, that just gives you a little bit more opportunity to showcase your personal background, your explicit experience, because the ticking a box that just says my background is law stuff, tick, it doesn't really give them very much background. So if you've started off life as a solicitor and you've become a barrister and you've taken on a load of roles within chambers, or you've done a lot of work with the BSB or within women in criminal law, things like that, then you don't get that opportunity to showcase them. So bring them out in the examples. So for the High Court, you just get a slightly different version of the competencies. And I think it allows you to sell yourself in your specific circumstances in a much, much better way. You often have to do a CV and a covering letter and give some examples of written work for that as well. Okay. I just thought I'd just use this as a way to illustrate some of the different processes that the JAC use for various competitions. So any of you that have seen the Deputy District Judge or the fee-paid FTT or the fee-paid employment judge roles, those for the first time have had this bundled together combined qualifying tests. So everybody applying for those 3 roles had to register and do this combined qualifying test, which all happens online. Then if you get through that stage, you go on to a scenario test, which we'll talk about later. And again, then you start to get into, once you've passed all that, then you fill in the application form with your 5 competencies, then they go to the assessors, and then you have the selection day. And usually the selection day for first rung judicial roles, usually that will have a role play within it. If, for example, so circuit, for example, there, the selection day is situational questioning. So because you've got to have had judicial experience for that, they will not necessarily do a role play, but just test how you will react in certain situations by giving you a sort of a verbal role play, if you like, and they call it situational questioning. So different processes, and they're changing them all of the time. They're introducing the first name blind sift, the blind name sift for the current Deputy High Court Judge competition. That's the first time they've done that. They had a telephone assessment sift for that competition last year. They haven't got it this year. I think there's going to be so many people applying, they will need to add that. But you can see circuit competition, for example, it's just you fill in your form, they go to the assessors, you get paper sifted, and then you get through to selection day. In terms of selection day, it's usually 2 people per post who are pulled forward for the selection day. So by the time you get to selection day, the odds are more like 50-50 rather than the 15%, 18% that Anne was talking about earlier. So that just gives you an idea of how those differ. I'm also just aware of the time, so we might need to speed up a bit, Anne.
Maybe I can just tell you a couple of questions, Kate. Although you'd said we're hurrying along, I'll just pause you quickly.
Okay.
A practical question. This person says, at the moment, in the current circumstances, how are the role plays and interviews being dealt with? Do you know if they're being dealt with virtually?
So at the moment, they are just doing business critical selection days, and they are being done remotely through Teams. And they're going to be done remotely through the JAC until January 2021 at the earliest. They have then got some competitions where role plays are going to start coming into action from about April. So there's some flexibility there for them to change it, but they're doing situational questioning and interviews remotely at the moment. And they've been doing that since March, and it's working quite well, to be honest.
If we move on to assessors, when you apply, you will need to be able to name 2 potential assessors. They used to be called referees, but referees sound more like sort of supporters. Assessors are intended to be people who will objectively assess your performance, and they need to be able to assess that against the same competencies that Kate talked about just now. So you need to think about who has seen you demonstrating those competencies. And it may be that one person can't speak to everything, but between the 2 that you seek, you're looking to cover good examples of all of those competencies. So the JAC now contacts all assessors. You don't have to do it. The JAC will do that for you. And this is the answer to Gudrun's question. They usually don't contact assessors until the selection day. So if you get through the primary sift, so if there are going to be these online tests that Kate just mentioned, rather than inviting the assessors for hundreds of people to send in assessments, they wait to see who gets through that initial sifting process to see who gets through to selection day. At that point, they will contact the assessors. So when you go into your interview at selection day, the panel have got in front of them your competencies as you've completed your self-assessment, plus what your assessors think of you. And if they're doing just a paper sift for the competition, so that there wouldn't be an online test, they would look at the papers together. They will then look at the form and seek the assessment at that stage. That tends to be for the smaller competitions. So they will, Gudrun was suggesting, is it worth putting the detail into the form? Absolutely, because you will need a strong form and a strong assessment to get through a paper sift, if that's the process of narrowing things down. And if you get through the qualifying test, in order to get through to the interview, when you go into interview, they will be looking at how strong is your form and your assessment at that stage when they're interviewing you. So you would have a really tough interview, I suspect, if you had only the bare bones in a form and you were still successful in getting through to that stage. So when you're looking for your assessors, you need people who can give the evidence of the competencies. They need to be able to verify your good character, and they may raise issues that then get probed further in your interview. For the first level, part-time appointments and fee-paid appointments, they say 2 professional assessors, please. And that could be head of chambers or senior partner in a firm if you're a solicitor. It could be a silk that you've done a lot of work with if you're a junior. It could be a barrister you've worked with if you're a solicitor. It could be a current or former colleague or client. I think a QC that you've worked with who also sits would be a perfect person to pick, because they've gone through the silk process, they've gone through the judicial application process, they know what a competency-based assessment it requires, and they hopefully would do a good job for you. If you were to pick a friendly colleague or a client, they may well be less familiar with quite how rigorous the process needs the assessment to be. So you're looking there, as it says, it's often head of chambers, and I think the JAC suggests it can be head of chambers. You might be in a massive set, or you might only have recently joined your current set, and your head of chambers might not know you so well. Or your head of chambers might have known you since you were a baby pupil and know you inside out. So it depends on your situation as to whether that would be the right person to pick. But what you're looking for is someone who can really support in terms of the competencies to risk manage, again, that you're going to be able to do the job. If you've already been sitting part-time or fee paid and you're looking for a full-time appointment, they would expect to see a judicial assessment there. So if you are in that situation and perhaps you haven't had an assessment or an appraisal, seek to get one. It may be you want to apply and then make sure that anybody that you're naming as an assessor comes to sit in, so they've got first-hand experience and material to draw upon. Because I'm aware that sometimes people who have been sitting and want to go for the full-time appointment haven't actually been given any feedback, or they feel that the judge in their court doesn't know them terribly well. So it's beholden on you to make sure that they do see you, appraise you, give you feedback as required. Yes, get a sense of what they might say to help you choose your assessors. By all means, speak to people. Say, you know, what have you seen? What examples have we got between us? What do you know about me? Is there anything you don't know about me? There isn't a guidance note as such for you to look at to send to the assessors. When the assessors are contacted by the JAC, they do receive guidance. It would be a good idea, I think, to send them the full competency framework so they can see not just the competencies but the bullet points underneath as an aid memoir for them when they're thinking about what they might write for you. And if you've done work with them, sending them a skeleton, or if you are already sitting and you have written judgments, by all means send those as a reminder of your work so the person has that in the forefront of their mind. It wouldn't be appropriate to seek to sort of influence or canvass them for support. It is intended to be an objective assessment, but clearly you are able to help their recall. There is a comment that's made in the guidance as well that ideally your assessors should be able to draw on examples from it within the last 2 years. Now, being a group of women, there may well be people here who've had time out of your practice in the last 2 years, and they are very aware of that. So they don't want that to be a disadvantage to people, so that would be worth something that's meant to mention. But for the purposes of the memory of the assessor, the last 2 years is a good rule of thumb to use. And I suspect that the last 6 months may have been quieter for quite a lot of people. So again, they will be bearing that in mind. You may need to go back a little further. But just as a guide, the last 2 years are thought to be best to seek examples.
And this person says, is there an absolute bar on using a judicial assessor if you are applying for a recorder and don't already sit?
Not at all, and a lot of people do. They are still deemed to be professional assessors, even though they are sitting. So absolutely, if you have a judge that you appear in front of a lot, who knows your work, has known you for some time, has seen you in a range of cases, is able to speak to several of the competencies, it absolutely includes people who sit, yeah.
This one not on assessors, but perhaps we could just deal with it briefly. Jane Austin says that the JAC say you don't need to be a silk to apply for Deputy High Court judge, but I've rarely seen anybody appointed who isn't a silk. What do you think about that in reality?
I think that it's the complexity of the work that you're dealing with, and inevitably the more complex cases are going to be dealt with by silks. We do have people who aren't silks who apply, and solicitor candidates very often aren't silks. They're only just sort of getting into the swing of getting that. So I don't know if you've got any solicitors here, so they may not be silks, and they certainly are getting through. But it's dictated by the complexity and the challenge of the work that you're doing, which is generally coming in at the higher end and the higher level. But it doesn't exclude it.
And also, you don't need to be a technical expert in the field. So, there are a number of people who sit as criminal recorders who don't have criminal practices. So you might be a silk in something, but actually be sitting as a recorder in another field. So I think if it's not too cheesy, just treat yourself as a unique human being, and no two candidates will ever be exactly the same. So think about what's different about you.
Quickly, just speeding through the process then, the shortlisting process. We talked about some competitions have a lot of sifts and some don't. Generally, the shortlisting is where there are a lot of applicants and a lot of vacancies. So like the Deputy District Judge, like the DJ competitions, like recorder competitions. So sometimes they're just a paper sift, and they have, sometimes you just forward 2 of the competencies and they do a paper sift on those 2, and then you forward the other 3 later if you get through to the next stage. They haven't done that for a while, but it was one of the ways that they were trying to reduce the admin burden and the pressure on people applying. The online qualifying tests have really taken off, and you will have heard all sorts of horror stories from people where lines drop off and, they're on holiday and they can't get the internet through the hotel room, or they can't get this, that and the other. But a lot of it is now happening online. There's a 24-hour window. They're very closely timed. You can use your computer and stuff like that, but because they're so closely timed, if you're starting to do research around questions, you're losing the time and you won't fill in as many questions. And what do these tests mean? It's points means prizes. And the more points you get, the higher up you're going to come. And that's how you're going to get into the pool of those selected at the end of the day. But sometimes they are multiple choice. Sometimes they are judge crafty type questions. If somebody applied to adjourn, what would you do? Or if you had this, that and the other going on in the public gallery, how would you deal with it? Things like that. Other sifts have been telephone assessments, and these are you're given some set text in advance, and then you're asked some questions, quite specific questions, in a very tight time frame, and you have to recall the information, process it, and be able to put your own spin on it and answer those questions. So they are quite testing, especially when you've got a senior judge sitting on the end of the telephone or on the end of the video asking you these questions, and you're like, oh no. So various shortlisting and sifting opportunities there.
Somebody has said, do you have any tips preparation wise for the online exam part, the online testing part?
Yeah, the basic tips that we can give, I think I've got on my blog site that you can download, but it's pretty much a bit like conversations with young people about O-levels and A-levels. Read the question. If there's points allocated to specific questions, focus on giving more information there. Come to reasoned decisions if you're asked to make a decision. So it's about show your workings. When you have multiple choice examples, there'll be 2 answers that are very close together, but differentiated by a couple of points in terms of the score that you get. So really think about, is it that gut one that I've gone to, or is the one that would be slightly better? But don't get yourself in too much of a knot, because if you overthink it, you're going to run out of time. So it's more the basics like that, not having any interruptions or doorbells going or whatever was going on earlier, having a clear desk, having clear time, trying not to do the test straight after a really long day in court and a lot of travel when you're tired and you've got people outside who just want to see you because they haven't seen you all day, kind of thing. So it's more basic. We can't teach you judgecraft and we can't teach you specific law. So, but we can generally help in that way.
I think timing and really using the material you get in advance is really key as well, isn't it, Kate? So they often will send out information 7 days in advance. And I think some people will really, really know that inside out and have made notes and have thought around it and read around it. And they will be able to deal with the time. And there will be people who have read the 2 pages they've been sent and they may struggle with the time. And it's again, like Kate said, it's your O-levels and GCSEs or exam technique, watching the time and making sure you get to the end of the paper, because if you don't finish the last question on the multiple choice, you're not getting those points.
Yeah.
Timing is really key.
Yeah. Okay. Selection day, Anne.
So selection day, as Kate's already said, will be remote till at least 2021. It'll be largely a competency-based interview. So they will probe around the competencies. You may have given 2 or 3 examples, perhaps in your 250 words about exercising judgment. And they might say, well, apart from that one, can you give us another example of when you've had to take steps to show fairness or ensure fairness? So they may probe for different examples, or they may probe for more complex examples. We usually had role plays. As we say, at the moment that's going to be difficult until they can do it not remotely, but role play, I was once told role play, like Morris dancing and incest, should be avoided at all costs, but I'm afraid the JAC don't seem to think that. And role play is basically them role playing, so there will be actors and you being you. So if you do get yourself into a role play situation, don't think you need to become a thespian. You should be as close to being your natural self with your first day in the role hat on. What would I be like on that Monday morning when I sit for the first time? I'm going to be like this. So get your sort of voice and your posture and your demeanor in your mind, and it's demonstrating how you will be, and it's demonstrating your authority and your calmness and that judgecraft that Kate talked about. So things that you will have seen happen in court. I'm sure this won't apply to people on this call, but we sometimes say to people, just go and sit in the back of the court if you feel you haven't seen, enough of what it's like so somebody applying to be a criminal recorder who hasn't been a criminal practitioner, for example, we would say, make sure you go and sit in just to see how the courtroom operates. You will have so much experience and examples from your own practice to draw upon that you would be able to deal with, having been on the other side of the bench. They may give a case study, they may give you scenario-based questions. So rather than having actors, they may say, well, here's the start of a story. What would you do with this application? And now what if this application was made, and how would you take this case forward? And now assume that this happens. So the scenario will unfold in front of you, but they're saving their budget and not spending it on actors. The same applies. It's to get you to demonstrate what you would do first day in the job. Very occasionally, and more likely for senior appointment, there would be a presentation. And sometimes you might be asked a question in your interview. You wouldn't necessarily realise why you're being asked the question, but it may be because the assessor has just left a question mark about, I'm not sure the complexity of their cases are of the right level to warrant appointment to judicial appointment at this point. So they may probe a bit more about your most complex cases. Kate's got up there sort of how you might feel about interviews at this stage, but it's all about ensuring that you can demonstrate those competencies again.
And we've had a question here related to that in the chat that says, if at selection day you might have to give further examples from your form, is it best to save some of those best examples for selection day, or should you just use them on the form anyway?
I'd say use them on the form, because you may not get that far otherwise, and you want to be as high up that list. If you can be top of the class, be top of the class. And there's going to be a gap between the time when the form goes in and the interview. The whole process is taking about 11 months at the minute for the current recorder competition. So you may well come up with even better examples that happen next week than you have on your form. So don't deliberately hold some back, I would advise.
And I would say, if you think there's 250 words per competency, you're going to have 2 or 3 stories, and you need those stories to be punchy. Some stories just need a lot more explaining to put them into context. And if you cut them back too much to fit them into 250 words, they don't come out as well. So that might be the kind of story that you're going to keep and save to use at the interview. So just in terms of tips and maybe some thinking around career planning that people might be doing, you can, if you're not ready to go for a judicial appointment yet, but you're planning it in a few years' time, you can be a guinea pig for the JAC so that you can do some dummy runs of their qualifying tests and their SIF tests, so that you then just get the experience of doing it beforehand. And you'll get feedback on how you did, so that you can just get yourself into the zone, so that you know what to expect when you are ready to apply for a competition. There's all sorts of alerts that you can sign up for if you're coming towards some competitions that are live, so you can sign up for an alert. There's something called Judging Your Future that you can sign up for as well. And the JAC online test, You Be the Judge. So there's another sort of little run through that you can do there. In terms of career, and I won't read all of these out because you'll get these as the handouts and you can read them in front of you, but one particular thing that I wanted to highlight is that there has traditionally been everybody becomes a recorder and then they become a circuit judge and then they become a high court judge, and that's the natural progressive route. What I would say is that that is changing now. Barristers are going for deputy district judge roles, which they never used to do 5 or 10 years ago. They just wouldn't have dreamed of going for those roles. But those roles now are offering opportunities to get a foot and a rung on the ladder. I particularly had a woman client who got a DJ job, but working 60% of the time. So a salaried role, but only for 60% of the time. She also then got recorder. So she was making decisions herself as a DJ and filling the rest of the week with jury work as a recorder. So she was getting a really great range of experience, then applied and got circuit and has just got Deputy High Court Section 9-1. So, you know, there's some different routes in. There are assistant coroner roles, there are deputy master roles for some people. So there are different ways that you can get in rather than through the traditional route. So just think about that and take it into consideration. The Deputy High Court roles now that are open for people with no previous judicial experience. And so that's a different route in as well, when you start to think about what you want from your career and whether you will enjoy being a judge and how you want to test that and how you want to get on that ladder. And that's about prepping in advance and starting to prepare and do as much as you can to get involved with any of these JAC tests in advance so that you can just do it. The Bar Council have mentors that will help you with any roles so that you can use that. I don't know if you use mentors yourself within the Women in Criminal Law group. Chloe's nodding her head, so there, but you've got some great sources of material and people who can help you and give you advice and wear your t-shirt in the background for you, because that's what you want. The men get it all the time. They've always got a leader, they're picked by their favourite leader, they get to work, and that leader then goes up and becomes a judge, wears their t-shirt, sells them in and does the job. We don't do that quite so much as women, and I would really encourage you to do that.
I'd just like to add, and I think it probably leads into what Kate's got there, is sort of, you know, the believe in yourself motto. I think that when we work with women who are applying for Silk, we know that women have a higher success rate at Silk than male counterparts. And we typically think that's because they wait longer or until somebody else has practically forced them to do it. And it's usually because a judge or a Silk has said, why haven't you applied? So I think there's no harm in applying. It doesn't count against you if you're unsuccessful. And don't expect to get it first time. Don't be put off if you don't get it first time. If this is something that you want to do, I think just apply for what comes along, give yourself plenty of practice, and at the right moment when there's the gap or the competition is different or your examples are slightly different, hopefully you'll come through. I know of at least one High Court judge who's now sitting, having been unsuccessful twice as Deputy High Court, has gone straight into High Court. So it's not a bar. As Kate was saying, routes will vary, and it totally depends on who else is in the competition at the time. Questions just popped up. Are we going to give a link to our website? Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, I should have. I'll put that back, and then you can see. So there at the end of the PowerPoint slide, you can see the various links, and there, the bottom link there is the Judicial link on our website. And then there's my blog site as well, where I just give general updates on things that are going on. So you will have that information.
And were you going to share the timeline, Kate, as well?
So this is the spreadsheet that you can everybody see that?
It's quite tiny, but I know we're sending it round via Chloe after this session, so people will see it in bigger form.
Yeah. So it's just showing you the various competitions down the left-hand side, and then the sort of timeline in terms of dates and when things are coming up, when they're due to launch, and things like that. So I hope that's a useful resource for people in terms of just checking out some of the competitions coming up. So there's a district judge mags competition that's coming up. That's DJ Mags is launching in October. There's the DJ Civil and Family, that's about to launch 23rd of September. The recorder competition, the deadline is next week. So various things there. In terms of the frequency of that, DJ Mags and Deputy District Judge Mags, they're every 2 years for those competitions. Every 18 months will be the salary tribunal jobs, the deputy tribunal jobs, and the fee paid roles. And then annually it's Deputy District Judge, Recorder, Deputy High Court, District Judge, Circuit Judge, High Court Judge. So all of those are annual.
Well, thank you so much, Kate and Anne. We will just give anybody else a last couple of minutes to ask any burning questions, although you have kindly asked and answered as we've gone through, so there may well not be anything left to ask. This person says, the JAC seem to have stopped giving individual feedback to people invited for selection day. That makes it feel a bit pointless reapplying if we don't know what we've done wrong. Do you have any advice about that?
It depends whether there's been some filters already. So if there have been filters already, you might get some explicit feedback. But they do, you're right, before selection day, if you get filtered out, you have to look at the generic test results so that you can then see how and why you might have got it. You can also get like a percentage grade for what percentage were you in that test and find that out, but it's not much help to a lot of people. You're absolutely right. So sometimes if you share that form with somebody else and say, what do you think about these examples, or what do you think I answered the question like they said in the feedback form, what else could I have done, and having a mentor to help with that might be useful.
There's a question also about the somebody saying, I think reading the ETBB is helpful for the online judgecraft test, which is the equal treatment bench book.
And somebody here says, I've done lots of work abroad. If I use examples from other jurisdictions, will that count against me? Which is a really interesting question.
No, it's because it's not about the jurisdiction, it's about how you are doing something. So if, and particularly in a different jurisdiction, if you're having to really get to grips with some of the cultural issues, some of the norms there that might be different, or indeed learn a whole layer of law that's different to apply, then again, that's going to bring with it some great depth.
And perhaps we'll just have this one as the last final question, because I can see your evenings ticking away. This person says, what would your advice be about applying for DDJ, for example, family or civil, when you're a criminal practitioner with criminal experience? What's your advice on that? And do you think you're likely to succeed for a different area?
I mean, definitely you can. So funnily enough, one of the people I was speaking to today, they are a family recorder, for example, but they're a planner. So, you know, it's like streets apart from the work that they do, but they just wanted wider experience. They just wanted to have the additional challenge. What I would say is you've got to be pretty committed if you're going to move into an area that's different. But equally, it might open up more opportunities for you later, because you've then got two strings to your bow. So you've got two opportunities to apply for future vacancies that might give you that range and depth. So it could be a good thing.
I take it back about there being one more. Ruth, you said that you have something that you'd like to share in terms of experiences. I don't know whether you want to just do that quickly to finish us off.
Well, it's just if you had anybody that's here that wanted to. Oh, right.
Yeah, I hope it's helpful to others. I was appointed recorder in 2018, And I had the experience of applying in 2017 when there were a lot of big problems with the online applications, to the extent that they shifted the whole process on several months. Only I was pregnant at the time, so by the time we got round to selection day, I was at about 37 weeks. It actually took quite a lot of negotiating, and I had to lean quite hard on them to get them to do it online. And I had my role play and interview all online, because I actually live in the US and I'm Skyping into you from New Haven in Connecticut. But it did work, and I would just say it doesn't matter what stage your career or pregnancy is at, don't let it stop you. We did manage to get to the other side, and I took my daughter with me to the training process, and I sat and nursed her during sentencing practice, and my mum came with me, and it worked out. So I wouldn't say it's been the easiest journey, but I did want to mention that it's possible.
Brilliant, Ruth. Thank you for sharing that.
It's a lovely experience. Thank you so much, Ruth. As Kate and Anne say, we will distribute their slides, the vacancy calendar, and all of their information, so you can be in touch with them. I'm sure that they would, offer you further help and assistance as they can in their usual consulting roles. So you'll be able to get back in touch with them. A small plug from me on behalf of WICL, that if you're not already one of our members, please make sure that you join up so that you're part and parcel of the whole WICL movement, and also to keep an eye out for our next few events, that although the Corona Initiative is no longer once a week, albeit it might be come in the next couple of weeks, although it's not now once a week, we are still maintaining at least once a month these big Zoom evenings. So please do make sure that you keep your eye out and keep coming. If there's any queries that arise from having watched the video, if you've watched it online, you can of course always send us an email and we'll get back in touch with you that way. So thank you so much, Kate and Anne, and goodbye everybody else.
Thank you, Chloe, for organising it. Lovely to meet everybody. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.